is Jamila Jamil. I am an actress, a writer, a host, and an advocate for women's rights. And what International Women's Day means to me is that I'm glad it exists now, but I hope it doesn't have to exist for long, because hopefully every day will be International Women's Day. I hope that there isn't going to always have to be a day to remind us for the need of women's rights, because they should just be human rights.
My name's Chelsea Handler. Today, I would like to frame myself as an activist and in celebration of International Women's Day and what that means to so many women and what it means to recognize each other and to show up for each other and to dismantle this patriarchy that we have systemically built all around the world, not just in our country, but that we are responsible for dismantling. And by that, it means showing up again and again for women all the time to understand that, you know, equality isn't the same as equity, and that we have reverse work to do. We have to work backwards for the mistakes that we've made thus far in terms of sexism, in terms of racism. So it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that we are reminding each other each and every day of what that responsibility means. And so I'm always happy to show up for that.
I can't follow that. I'm Amy Schumer, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to be a part of this conversation today, to celebrate and bring awareness to International Women's Day. And I think it's a good reminder, anytime you can remind people in general not to just think of themselves, but all human beings, and specifically women who have been treated unfairly since the dawn of time, and especially women of color. So I'm excited to continue my own education and help advocate today. And I would say I'm an activist and a bikini model.
Well, let me give you an example of something that happened yesterday. Yesterday, and this is not just white privilege, it's male privilege, you know, it's any privilege really. But this is a good example, I think. I went backcountry skiing yesterday. I've been in Canada for a few months, and I went backcountry skiing with a female ski guide who was a badass and this powerful, strong woman, you know, who could do anything that a man could do, but explain it better to other women. You know, I was rappelling down mountains. I was doing things I thought I was never capable of, but because I was in a woman's hands, I knew that she was looking after me in a way that sometimes men aren't aware of. And when we sat down for lunch, you know, on this beautiful mountaintop, we're sitting there, there's 6 of us, 4 girls, 2 guys. And we were talking about male privilege, and we were talking about this book, Caste, which I'm sure you've are all familiar with, which Amy introduced me to. And then, you know, I brought it up at this lunch. We were sitting on this mountain, and she was talking about, you know, how that explains privilege and what it's like to grow up as a person of color, and that really a white person never will understand what it's like to be different. We can only, you know, leap to and try to imagine, but we'll never really understand, just like a man will never understand what it's like to be a woman and walk home at night alone in the dark and worry that there's a possibility of you getting assaulted or attacked. You know, these are things men don't have to go through the world thinking about. And one of the guys on the trip, a white guy, I said, how do you guys feel about all this conversation about white male privilege and patriarchy? What are the feelings like it brings up in you? Obviously, it's important to have this dialogue. And one of the guys said, I feel like there's a lot of reverse discrimination. And, you know, I had to bite my tongue because I have no patience for that kind of bullshit. But I waited until I was in the car alone with him at the end of the day. And I said, hey, let's talk about that comment. You didn't get a lot of chance to talk today on the mountain because what you said was so stupid, nobody was listening to you afterwards. So let's talk about it now. And I said, reverse discrimination. I said, let's talk about it. You can't just make things equal. You have to go back and make up for the past. Just like we have to go back and make up for the past of what we did to Black people, even though it was our ancestors and we weren't around, we are still responsible. Just like men are still responsible for moving over for women during this adjustment period, everyone has to give a little bit away who has too much. We're not asking for people that don't have anything to give anything away, but we're asking for the people who have a lot to step aside and give a place to a person of color, to a woman, you know, give it away. And when I explained it to him in that way, he said, wow, I didn't even think about that. I thought we could just make sure everything was equal moving forward. I go, wouldn't that be great? but we can't. So you have to acknowledge the past to move forward. So that's how I feel, you know, with regard to sexism and racism.
I just want to say about that, Chelsea, that's so relevant, and that's such a good entry point, because I think a lot of people are in the dark and haven't educated themselves. And, you know, and it's hard, and good for you for not exploding right then. When you said that, he said like the reverse discrimination, all the blood went to my head. And I understand that. And you talk to a lot of people who feel like, well, look, I wasn't around then, but like we talked about in Cast, as Isabel Wilkerson says, it's like going into a movie halfway through. Like, just because you weren't alive then, doesn't mean that you shouldn't do everything in your power while you're alive to change it.
It made me think about how we look at the idea of inheritance only as a good thing that you inherit normally. It's money, it's something good. And it's like, you inherit everything. You inherit the good and the money, and also the bad and the demons of your lineage's past. And I think it's really important to think about it that way. But I agree with both of you. I think when we're talking about feminism, it's so important to make sure that it is such an intersectional conversation, and that transcends just talking about gender or race. There's also disability. I have non-disabled privilege. I have slim privilege. I do not get discriminated discriminated over. Why can I not remember the word? I do not have doctors discriminate against me. I do not have employers discriminate against me. I'm not one of the people who, there are actually people in this world who are told by dating sites that they are within the 3% of unmatchables and therefore cannot join the dating site. And those often are people with disabilities or people who are larger and people of color. They are emailed after joining dating sites to say that that their business is not required because no one will love them. They're told that explicitly, as if that is the truth. So I think that is a type of privilege I have. We refer to a new term of sort of pretty privilege, where if you exist within the confines of society's standards of current beauty, which are constantly changing, because 10 years ago, I was definitely not considered a standard of any kind of beauty because of my race. And who knows what it'll shift to later. But privilege comes in all kinds of different forms. It's also a financial privilege. There are class privileges. And so I think it's just always acknowledging those and never just thinking that feminism is just one of those things that you have to take care of. It's like, if we take care of one, we take care of all. And that's the way that we all rise. There are huge communities of people, trans women, who go unchecked. I have cis privilege. There are so many different ways that we walk through the world. And it doesn't mean that we cannot think of the oppression that we face. I face racism all the time. I face sexism all the time, but it doesn't mean that I shouldn't also be looking out for the other people who are receiving far more oppression than I do. And so I've built my platform, I Weigh, which is it's a growing community of almost 1.5 million people from all different walks of life. And what we try to do there, I'm not saying that I am a perfect activist or I'm a perfect example of being able to pass the mic perfectly, but what I've tried to do is build this platform where we do hand over to younger activists from Indigenous communities or disabled communities, etc., to be able to educate all of us as one. I try to not take up too much space, but it's a learning process. It's an incremental growth, and I'm still figuring it out.
To piggyback off what Jamila is saying is like, it's, we participate in the structure of society. We are a product of our environment and our society. Yeah. So we are participating in this cycle unbeknownst to us, even when we are, activated and being activists. It's like, oh, we marginalize other women when we're not thinking clearly. We're part of a pattern of behavior that we have to stop the cycle of. It's up to every single one of us to say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not acting like that, because that's a system that was put in place by men. And that doesn't even apply to the situation. So we have all these constructs and structures that are kind of built for us that we're just participating in and perpetrating.
I was also going to say that and it's also a fine line to walk when you have that privilege of making sure that you use that privilege in order to be able to raise awareness or help others or signal boost the work of others. But sometimes, especially if you're a woman in the public eye or a person in the public eye, they then center you in that conversation, and then you take up all the space and just suck up all the air in the room. And so I think it's a constant tightrope to walk of making sure that you are ensuring the conversation is had, but not being the entire conversation in and of itself.
That's a great point. And it's like, it really is something that you kind of can't win. So why even try? And I think you bring up a great point, and Chelsea also, by talking to that guy, it's like, we need to be having these uncomfortable conversations because allyship is so imperfect, and it is such a constant negotiation. And one thing that I have found really freeing is to your friends who are not white, who are disabled, who are women of color, just say, tell me when I fuck up. We're not going to get it right. But if you're someone who is actively interested in educating themselves and using whatever, influence they have to bring people on that journey with you and try and make things get better, then that's all you can do. Because of course people want to criticize and point out, and there's so many things that are activism in general just annoys people, and it doesn't matter because that's just the systems in place trying to keep the patriarchy in place. That's why so many people just aren't educated. They don't understand, and so they don't know what a feminist is. So they try to take themselves out of the conversation immediately. But it is because of these systems that we've grown up in, myself included. I had no idea that, we are all completely living in this white supremacy and this caste system. And I really didn't know the depth of that. I still don't know the depth of that, but the last couple of years, have been so eye-opening. And it's up to us to, every time we leave the house, it's like wallet, keys, phone, what can I do to change the system? It's every opportunity, every conversation. And however that affects other people, and if it annoys them and you're taking up too much space, it's like, to a certain extent, and I agree with you, Jamila, we have to be conscious of that so that we can keep our reach as wide as it can be. But also kind of knowing that you can't win, and it's this evolving thing. It's kind of freeing to me.
I feel like it's a tool of patriarchy to make the conversation of change so taboo and so stigmatized. I think that en masse as a society, as generations, we need to change our relationship with rejection and with failure. If we stop looking at them as such a big deal, then we will be more open to learning. But because we have made a mockery of people fucking up, and we make a mockery of their apologies, we almost double down on our pylons when someone admits to having done something wrong. I think we need to be a bit more solution-based with our attitude going forward, and we need those who have a lot to learn to not feel so embarrassed about having something to learn that they then just don't put their hand up when they have a question, and they don't participate in the conversation at all, because that's how we end up with no growth whatsoever.
Right. People are so afraid of getting it wrong that they don't even want to take part, and that's only a negative thing.
Yeah, we just need to change our relationship with rejection.
And a lot of those people that are so scared of getting it wrong are closer to us than we think. We think we surround ourselves with like-minded people, but the people we end up having these really important conversations with are sometimes people that are closer than we think. Friends, family, that we're like, oh, you haven't gotten this deep into this. So let me help you without patronizing, without being condescending, but you need to really start thinking deeply about this matter, because what Jamila said earlier is, it's not about your experience. My experience with life has been excellent. It's about the experience that I don't know about, and the experiences I don't know about. And it's about putting yourself out there to understand and learn about what other people are experiencing and how you're going to help them.
Yeah. And Rachel Cargill said once that we look at influencer now as someone who's got 10,000 plus followers online. And actually, if you have access to just one other person whose mind you can change, whose vote you can change, as we saw last year, then you are an influencer. You have the capability to change the world. If we can all just influence just 1 or 5 other people, we could create such mass change.
Yeah, and Isabel Wilkerson talks about radical empathy and exercising that. And there's nothing that can compare to someone's experience. Radical empathy is empathy is about imagining yourself in someone else's shoes, but we can't even do that, I can't imagine what it would be like to drive home and be pulled over if I were a Black person, like in any situation, you know, like I can do my best to imagine what it's like for that person. And one of my aha moments, I would say, was when I was arrested. One of the times, I went to oppose Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation for the Supreme Court, and you know, and I was like, okay, I can go down and to DC and use my, you know, civil disobedience and get, you know, use my voice and whatever. And I really didn't have any. I was pregnant. I didn't really have any concerns because of my privilege. It's not the same for me to go, I'm going to go get arrested today, as it would be for someone who, you know, has different melanin in their skin than I do.
As I said, like, there are so many different facets of it, including also just, I never want us to forget about disability as well and trans issues. But when it comes to poverty, it's such a huge, there's such a huge wealth gap. And it just seems to be growing and growing with every single generation. And yet every generation of government seems to have less and less empathy or sympathy for those who are falling on increasing hard times. And I think the reason that I care so much about Project Twister is that I grew up in poverty, and I had a single mother, and we had multiple severely mentally ill members of our family. And I was incredibly sick. So was my brother. And we grew up in a system that made space for people who were struggling. We grew up in a system that had a national health service, free healthcare. I cannot believe I'm now living in a country that I adore, but that doesn't have free healthcare. And I cannot believe the way that it just ravages people's entire lives. Just getting cancer can lose you your house, your job, your car, your existence. And so I think that for me, changing the stigma and the shaming around poverty is the only way that we're going to be able to get the government to start supporting people. You know, my schooling was paid for. They paid for my transport. They gave us somewhere to live. They gave us money for food. They gave us extra money for disabilities if I had a family member who was too mentally ill to be able to go outside. That was a support system that doesn't exist anymore in the UK so much. We have a struggling NHS system that they're desperate to privatize and make it just like the American healthcare model. And they are just forcing people further and further towards the streets and towards drugs and towards mental health care. There's no funding for mental health care. And so I just think poverty is a way that we keep people down. And in particular, of course, that impacts women. We see the difference in the GDP crisis for women. And however much we may all hate capitalism, and however much we may acknowledge the evils of capitalism that do exist, currently, money is freedom for women. And I know that that is the dirty and wrong and unsocialist and un-Marxist thing to say, but being able to know that if I have an emergency, I don't have to rely on a man, and that I can make my own decisions, and that I as a businesswoman can hire other women and people of color and people from backgrounds that don't always get hired for jobs, gives me freedom ultimately. And so I think that that's how talking about poverty ties into women, because it falls hardest on us. We're the ones with the least pay, and we are the least likely to be protected, and we're the ones who most need to be protected. But also generally it is just a humanitarian crisis that we are seeing grow and grow and grow, and the governments continue to not do anything about it. And I'm pissed.
I'm pissed too. And it's not just, and you know, it is women, but we all know it's women of color more than anyone. And so that's the thing, is even the richest, there is a time where, you know, 12% of Black women are 12% more likely to die unnecessarily during childbirth in New York State. Serena Williams, the doctors weren't listening to her. It doesn't matter how rich you are. The built-in stigmas and racism is real, and it is deadly. And we don't have to look any further than COVID.
I was talking to Dr. Seema Yasmin last week on my podcast, and she was telling me that there is an actual life expectancy depending on your postcode, because of how much you can tie life expectancy to the environmental conditions in which you are living. So how many factories are nearby you, what shit they're putting in your water. And I just think that is just mind blowing. And the way that we're seeing this correlation between COVID, this pandemic that is impacting brown and black people disproportionately, because they are often the ones who live in the poorest areas that are more likely to have the shittier water, the lack of healthcare, and the poor air quality.
And something to understand, this is a talk I just listened to like a month or two ago about racism. It was with NSA, or yeah, I think it was with NSA, and she was talking about, it's racist, it's bias, then it turns into discrimination, and then it turns into racism. Right? So you have biases that are born of your culture, or you grew up in a certain household, or you grew, whatever. We all have biases. And then when you act on that, it turns into discrimination. And then when you take it up a notch, that's racism. So you're constantly acting, there's these different steps and footholds where you're acting out this kind of behavior. So you want to just immediately recognize your own bias right away and go, okay, I'm not acting on that. I'm going to change that negative into a positive, change that act of hatred or that thought of, negativity into love, into kindness, into inclusivity. And all of that, that was something that I heard that I went, oh, that makes such sense, how it kind of gets carried away from you, if you don't have a handle on it. And I think that's, a starting point for so many of us.
Yeah. And Dr. Ibram Kendi talks about the fact that, similar to what you're saying with these steps, that if we were to look at something like racism or bias as a diagnosis rather than this tattoo, that we would feel more hopeful about our ability to change it. But because we look at it as like, oh no, I've been tattooed, I've been branded, this awful, evil, disgusting thing that must be shunned from society, therefore I can't even look at it. I just need to shut the door on this entire conversation and run away from it, deny it, and never work on it, because then that will confirm that it was true. Whereas if we started to look at it as similar to something like, for example, cancer, it's like, oh, you have this thing, it needs to be cut out of you, you need to remove it from within you, and then you can carry on and live a happy, good life. I think we would feel more like it was more approachable, more relatable, and like there's actually hope for us to change. If we stop being so, again, like rejected, so disgusted by it, then we'd be able to have the conversation. And I hope that has been a big change from the last year, where the conversation of privilege is no longer shunned, the conversation of racism, like white people are leaning into it more than ever before.
And to also be, bring up these conversations at the dinner table where it's uncomfortable, make people uncomfortable. That's what we're supposed to be doing. If you have, you don't have to have a strong personality to stand for something. You can simply say, like, I'm not going to sit at a dinner table and talk about this stuff. It's racist what you're saying. And then and then argue the case for why. Like, little conversations like that have ripple effects, and they have meaning. So, I like to make sure that I'm always like, thinking about that first and foremost, and that I don't let anything that's racist or sexist slide in my presence. And I think that's something that, all of us can do, even people watching this who think, oh, I don't have a huge social media following, or I'm not an influencer or whatever. Like, you're influencing people in your life. Every one of us is. So it's important to stand up for these things, when it doesn't feel comfortable.
Three women who are masters at making people uncomfortable.
Yeah. But you have to say, I mean, you have to like make that rule for yourself. Like, the buck stops here. And that goes for sexism and racism. Like, even I think we've all been to like a doctor's appointment where the doctor made you a little uncomfortable. And, it doesn't have to be that you get fully sexually assaulted. It's good to flag people's behavior and say, I just want to let you know that when you just said that, or the way you just touched me, that made me uncomfortable, because you have to think about the people who are coming after you, so it can just be as much, you're talking about how we're all influencers, and that's so helpful, because just to say, like, I just am going to make this commitment to myself that all these situations I personally encounter, the people who they encounter after me will have had a conversation about this. Oh, but yeah, it doesn't have to be, people are like, what can I do? And our friends who are like nurses and teachers, and they're not, entertainers or whatever, they're busy. People are trying to feed their kids. They're trying to get through this time, but still you can think about things like where do you have your money? What bank is it in? You can look into if they have a history of redlining, and not giving mortgages to families of color. You can, for people like us who are job creators, we can go, I don't want to work with a brand or with a company. I want to make sure that their board looks like the population. I want to make sure who's on your board. Is it all white men? Because then I'm sorry, but our conversation's over. And then, you know, that'll wake some people up, or, you know, because like women aren't on boards and women of color definitely aren't on boards.
Truly. And again, it extends into like further into gender and disability. But what you're saying is so true about just even confronting a doctor or confronting someone at a dinner table. There's a neuroscientist called Dr. Deepika Chopra, and she talks about the fact that neurologically, when you make a mistake, when you understand you've made a mistake, is when your brain learns the fastest and the most, and it makes the biggest impact neurologically on your brain's ability to retain new information, attain new information. So you're more likely to remember something and learn something upon making a mistake. And that's why
I don't think that she's met my husband. But can I tell you something? I always thought that Deepak Chopra was a man.
No, she's a different doctor, Deepika Chopra. No.
Don't confuse it. We can only handle one Chopra at a time. We're both white. Wow.
Yeah, no.
Here it is, right here. Here we are, right here.
That is a close fucking name. Okay,
You
and I
know?
have my quick English accent. So that's.
No, please don't take the blame on this.
But truly, I think that's fascinating. And again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier of like, don't make people we shouldn't be afraid to call people out, and people shouldn't be afraid of being called out, because that's when we will learn the fastest and the best.
Yeah.
And so
That's a
that
good
little
point.
impact.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And it's, point. It's true. It's true for me.
Same, definitely for me.
Yeah. You know, because nobody wants to feel like they're learning. And like Jamila was just saying, like you learn more practically. So I like to, you know, throw it in a bunch of really dumb jokes. And so, you know, we made a sketch on my TV show that was a parody of Friday Night Lights. And it was, that was, you know, a show about a small Southern town who's like a big football town. And it was kind of like a new coach came to town and was like, you know, his new rule was like, don't rape. And they're like, come on, coach. You know, it was just, and it was a parody of that. So it's like, you know, making light of one of the most atrocious things you can imagine, but in a watchable way you can consume. And so that's been my, you know, like my tactic is, I guess, shaved carrots in the
It's like the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. I remember showing a bunch of my guy friends the Woman's Last Fuckable Day. That sketch and what an impact that made on all of them, and what like a 2-hour conversation that sparked, where it was truly the spoonful of sugar that helped the medicine go down. Like they were able to ingest it and then really think about it, and then they couldn't stop thinking about it afterwards, about how we just don't have that for men. Men, if anything, get more fuckable. The more white hairs they have, we start shooting them in HD after the age of 40, you know, just like closing up on those sexy fucking, we're gonna fuck the wrinkles, like we, and yet
I also have a propensity for fucking older guys, so I have to take some of the heat on this. Like,
this is great, Chelsea. We love this, but can we also like have that go back the same way and not make a woman's movie where the women are over the age of 40 all look like fucking emojis?
Well, it's because of the whole system. I mean, we've all been raised on the male gaze. You know, every movie was the slow pan up a woman's, you know, foot. We're all like, do they want me to try and fuck her? So it's like, you know, every day just paying attention to that and undoing these things, that this culture that we have been completely born into. And sometimes it really is. I'm sure it's been hard for people to have patience with me. And sometimes it's just, you really run short on patience.
Because it's like, how many nice ways can you say, hey, the party's over, assholes. We're going to tell on you now when you rape us. We're going to tell each other and we're going to tell on you. And they feel like something's being taken away from them. It's like, no, it's rape. It's nothing's being taken away from you. Something's been given back to us. Yeah,
like people haven't gotten the memo.
It's that quote that equality to the privileged feels like oppression.
Yes.
It's so true and so upsetting. And I kind of get it. I understand their mind frame. I don't agree with it, but I can understand how that would feel. But too fucking bad.
It's really annoying.
Tough shit. Yeah, it is annoying.
It's so annoying.
Of something being taken away from you, suddenly you being like, step aside to take that job because of the system that you didn't participate in yourself, maybe. But tough shit. Like, look how everyone else is living all of this time. So
like
just
these like white male comics who are like, you know, I can't get a job anymore. And it's just like, well, good. Like, get to the back of the fucking line, because people are being treated like animals, you know? Is that okay with everybody? At this point, I really have a hard time having a conversation with someone who's okay with anybody being treated, you know, without equality. It's just like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah,
I have a friend named Melina Abdullah who she works with Patrice, and she runs Black Lives Matter chapter in LA, and she has 3 kids, and she's come over and spent a lot of time in my house when I was in LA explaining to me, you know, she was in my documentary, Hello Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea, which was about my own white privilege and trying to understand for my own, you know, peace of mind, what does white privilege mean? What does it mean? Because I had this idea that it meant you went to Harvard, or you were a Rockefeller, or you were a legacy family. I didn't understand all the nuances of white privilege, of just the privilege of going to the grocery store and stealing Swedish fish without anybody looking, you know, that kind of thing. So she kind of really helped me. And, you know, it's funny, I had some agents when I started hanging out with her and I was going to marches and protests, and they were like, you need to stay away from her. She's really radical. And it's like, now to me, radical only means right. You know, radical doesn't mean stay away from them. That means let's go towards the light, because eventually radical ends up being real and pragmatic for life. So she's one of these women. She goes and protests all the time. She got rid of Jackie Lacey. Oh, sorry. I think one of my dogs just passed away. She got rid of Jackie Lacey in LA. She got rid, you know, she is indefatigable, and her children are warriors. And she's just taught me how to show up in the right, effective way, you know? And I know Amy and I have this in common, and I'm sure you do too, Jamila, where you want to just blow it out. You want to be everywhere. You want to say yes to everything. You know, and then all of a sudden you're like in a corner going, what the fuck I don't even know which way is up anymore. So it's also about calibrating your activism so that you can have the biggest impact, when you can have the biggest impact, where, with what people, and really making the most of those moments instead of spreading yourself, you know, either so thin that you're not having an impact or that you lose steam, because that's what we don't want. We don't want us ever to give up, right? We want to always be able to engage.
Someone that I learn from constantly is Monroe Bergdorf. She's English. She's a young Black trans model, activist, writer, just such an extraordinary commentator on so many different subjects, not just trans issues, not just the issues of Black people. She's such a leader. She's so thoughtful. She's so accountable for her own previous mistakes or ignorances, and she is constantly looking towards an actual solution. Shei Akiwowo said that activism should be trauma-led, and I think that Monroe is an extraordinary example of someone who's just using her trauma to kind of push forward this movement for the rights of women, the rights of especially Black trans women. And I think that she's someone who I just learn from, and I can take her teachings and apply them to almost any marginalized group in the world. And so she's someone I really look up to. And then there's also this incredible activist online called Your Fat Friend. It's at YRFATFRIEND. And she is someone who talks a lot about fat liberation and about disability. And again, she's so good at talking about the marginalization of Black people, again, without taking up the space. She's so perfect at kind of elevating them without, and being able to give them her support without ever overpowering them. And so those are 2 people that I've learned so much from over the years. And I desperately needed that guidance. And so I'm really grateful that they exist. And I'll just keep trying to learn from them so I don't fuck up as much.
You, Amy.
Oprah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You know, well, first of all, Jamila and Chelsea inspire me all the time. And
Thanks.
And it feels so good. Jamila and I are new friends, but Chelsea, to have people you're really close to that have the same fire in them, and to keep each other motivated and informed and grounded. I love those quotes you said. Trauma informed, not trauma led is so good. I feel like also with the Me Too movement, the misconception was that it was a bunch of us sitting, or is a bunch of us sitting around like crying about our rapes, and we should absolutely take up the space to do that. But that's not the point. That's not what gets stuff done. So I love hearing it said that way. And then
and Tarana Burke, speaking of the Me Too movement, what a fucking great leader.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tarana Burke. And Chelsea, you just said, oh, radical means right. I love that. That's so good. So yeah, I would say I have so many people that I'm lucky to be in touch with, Sarah McBride, who was just voted to the Senate in Delaware, an incredible trans woman. I would say, like, a lot of artists also. Like, I grew up loving Whoopi Goldberg and Toni Morrison, and, you know, just women in general who sort of weren't, I don't know, checking the boxes that it felt like we were all supposed to. And Nina Simone and Paula Giddings, Ani DeFranco, James Baldwin, Fred Hampton, you know, a million people, and looking for more all the time.
The most important thing to not think about is yourself. That's the first thing you can do as an ally. Check your ego at the door, check your self-interest at the door, check your hope for congratulations at the door. It is not a popularity contest, and it's really important not to weaponize it as one. It's something that you really have to make not about you at all, and you have to walk in willing to make the mistakes, willing to be embarrassed, willing to fall sometimes, and know that the greater purpose is so much bigger than you or your public image, however public that may or may not be. It's okay to fall as long as you get back up, you're accountable, you apologize, and you move on. You know, I was on a comedy for 4 years called The Good Place, where the overriding lesson of the entire show was just try to be better tomorrow than you were today. And that's your ongoing goal for the rest of your time in existence. And I really think that that is the most attainable solution to us growing as allies. But just don't think about you. Think about everyone else. But also, little tip, if you are going to enter into the world of full-on allyship or activism, therapy is a very good thing if you can access it. Any kind of support structure or therapy is a good thing to have, because activism and allyship can be fucking brutal. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't all enter into it, but I think it's just really important to make sure, like I said, about not making sure that it's not trauma-led. You want to make sure that you have as much of a steady foundation as you can grasp before you enter into that world. Otherwise you can get kind of flipped upside down.
I would say I'm just open to advice on how to do it better every day. But, you know, what Jamila said is so true. Just get your white guilt or your privilege guilt out of the way, because it's not useful. So just, you know, and I'm also trying to say that to myself about being a mom. And I would just say, just do one thing a day. Just find one little way to resist and help every day. Yeah. And just, I mean, Jamila said it so well. You're going to fuck up. Get back on the horse, because it's not cool.
I would just say, listen a lot more than you're talking.